Welcome to episode 7 of the Randy Wilson podcast. I am your host, Randy Wilson, and today we are going to be discussing community mental health. My guest today is Nikki Shaw. Her name is Nikki Shaw Buchanan. However, we're going to stick to Nikki Shaw because she has been a licensed professional for many years, and she got that license before she got married. So professionally, she's known as Nikki Shaw. Thank you, Nikki, for joining in today with us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really happy to have you, and I'm also very appreciative to your support in resharing and reposting things from the podcast. I'm very appreciative of that.
Of course, you're doing great things.
Thank you. I also want to make sure that before we get started on the podcast, that I show appreciation to all people who follow the podcast. You can learn more about the podcast at R. Wilson Podcast on Instagram. The Randy Wilson Podcast is on all podcast channels, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Libsyn. All of them. You name it, it's there. It's on YouTube. So please subscribe to the Randy Wilson podcast and feel free to DM or send me questions or provide feedback at any time. I'm very appreciative of all of that. So we're going to get into community mental health today. However, I was originally hesitant about doing a podcast on mental health, only because the reason I started podcasting was because I wanted to do something outside of mental health. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of people out there who follow the podcast, you may not even be familiar with the fact that I am a mental health professional, right, because I don't talk about it a lot. Mm-hmm. Nikki, our guest today on the show, is a licensed mental health professional and a whole bunch of other things as well. She's also a certified substance abuse counselor, and she has many years of experience in the field of mental health. She's worked at executive levels in mental health. She's worked in probation and parole. Nikki, if you go into a little bit more detail about your experience in mental health, because I don't even know where to start.
So I've pretty much worked in every avenue of community-based services. I started out in probation and parole, as you stated. I was an intern there and actually got hired as a probation and parole officer out of grad school, which was not on my radar at all, but it was an available position. Mm-hmm. And at that age, you want a stable check with benefits, and it actually ultimately ended up changing my life. I did really, really great work there, and I actually worked with probation and parole for about a total of 8 years. I left for 2 years to do some therapeutic day treatment and went back for 2 more years. So I was in that environment. The office that I worked in was actually the largest probation district in Virginia. So I got to see all types of probationers and parolees that had a wide spectrum of mental health diagnosis as well as substance abuse disorders. And the common theme that I saw was underrepresentation, which led to lengthy sentences or extended time on probation and parole. And by the time I met them, they were finished with those sentences, but of course, like people say, they still had a certain amount of years over their head to comply with the requirements. And when you meet a lot of these probationers, you can immediately see that if they receive some of the services, whether it be counseling or substance abuse counseling and things like that at a younger age, they probably wouldn't have gone down the path that they did. So that's where I knew very quickly that that's where my focus would be.
Mm-hmm. Not surprising to me. I met you when you was in probation and parole officially. Right. Mm-hmm. I think I knew who you was, but didn't know you. And then it was meeting you in probation and parole. Mm-hmm. We're going to stay on there, but when you meet a good licensed mental health professional, when I met Nikki, she didn't realize what was going to happen.
No.
It's like I allowed myself, and she fortunately allowed herself to become a sponge, because working with a good mental health professional can be very beneficial to your own mental health. Nikki's been my therapist. She's been my colleague. She's been my friend, and now she's my cousin. Nikki introduced me to my wife. She has completely canceled my life. And now we're family. And I mean, for those of you listening, you may not be familiar with it, but District 1 in Richmond City, in Richmond, Virginia, is, as she said, the biggest probation. Is it the biggest?
Yes, the largest probation district in Virginia, in the state of Virginia.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but is it the only one that actually has the substance abuse treatment component?
Yeah. Well, at this point, they do have different offices have mental health and substance abuse services that are contracted, but District 1 was the only office that had an in-house substance abuse and mental health unit. They also had like a sex offender unit. They had one for gangs. So because it was such a large office, we had more funding and more space available to do a lot more services.
With Richmond being the capital of Virginia and one of the biggest cities in Virginia, it's a metropolitan urban area, it's interesting. You can be an inmate being released in Richmond, but reside in Southwest Virginia.
Yes.
That's common.
It's very common.
And it's interesting. I think that's the thing about Richmond. It makes it like the mental health melting pot, because it's a place where poverty is higher than a lot of places. Crime is higher than a lot of places. However, all the people who are quote unquote considered criminals and oftentimes have severe mental illness, they are let out they're released in Richmond.
Or you have a lot of clients back then, of course, they were, because of my role, I would refer to them as either probationers or offenders, but now I refer to everybody as clients. But when you're talking about, say, Southwest Virginia, the common occurrences in those areas are there are no services. There's nothing for them to come home to. So the things that they need as far as jobs and housing and counseling services and all of that, it's so difficult for them to access it there. If they can find someone that they can live with in the city, they think, oh, it's so much better here. But then that's what happens. We have a lot of services, but there's so many people that need services. We don't have enough to cover the need. And so the sad part is a lot of times people with criminal records get pushed to the back of the line, and in a lot of instances, there's some of the people that need it the most.
So for those of you out there listening, again, our topic today is community mental health, and our goal as mental health professionals is to be informative and educate those on options, services, resources. You can be a person being released from the correctional system and you can be released in Richmond, where the majority of people are released. And part of the reason is that there are limited resources, services available in whatever area that you may come from. What does the probation and parole office do in helping bridge that gap, though, to help these people transition back?
They do a lot. The POs have a very important role in trying to help clients transition back into the community. It starts with what type of discharge or home plan they have coming out of, whether it be the jail or the institution that they're coming from. But to try to assist them with getting stable housing, because sometimes, depending on, like, when they went into jail, they may have been staying with family in, say, in subsidized housing or something like that. Now they come out with a felony, they can't live where they were living before. But one of the conditions of probation and parole, you have to have a stable residence, and you're supposed to work and things like that. So they're trying to find employers that are willing to hire people with felonies. There are certain tax benefits that you can get or that for hiring people with felonies. So they try to network and start these relationships and kind of say, look, I'll send you reliable people, and you know that they have to report to me. So they will, attend classes that they're supposed to. They will remain drug free because we're continuing to drug screen them on a regular basis and things like that. So they kind of try to build those relationships. They'll also try to set them up with case managers like at the community service boards and things like that, so that they can get counseling or so that they can get their medication. Typically when you're released from whether it be a jail or institution, you have the rest of whatever your prescription is. So if it's a 30-day prescription, you may have 15 days left. That's what you're released with to give you time to get that appointment scheduled, to start, to get a refill. But sometimes you have to get your Medicaid active. The waiting lists are too long and things like that. So it's a tough transition for people that are coming out that don't know how to access those services.
I think that one of the biggest challenges in the transition is that insurance component. In a lot of places out there, in a lot of facilities, depending on it, well, sometimes you have people being discharged from state hospitals that are prison settings, and then you have people just coming out the prison. But in any chance that you have a case manager or a care coordinator or someone who's working with you who's able to get that process started early is critical.
Right.
I remember when we met many years ago, a lot of the clients that we would work with that came out of the system, we would have them connected to the OAR.
Right. Offender aid and restoration.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Offender aid and restoration. So for those of you out there who are not familiar with it, this is a place that provides resources for people coming out of the system and helping them get a social security card or an ID. Those are critical things. If you don't have a social security card or an ID, you're not going to get a place of residence. You're not going to get anything. Those are critical.
Can't get a job.
No.
Yeah.
And so and then there's a counseling component to it as well. It's a place where there's air conditioning, and a lot of times people coming at the system end up being homeless.
Right.
So I know if you are in the Richmond metropolitan area, there are OARs here. I know there is an OAR in Petersburg. Is OAR across the state?
There are several branches, but I'm not sure how widespread they are. But there are organizations that are similar like that in different localities. Yeah. So they would and a lot of times, especially if you have a client that's coming out and they're on probation and parole, their PO will connect them to services like that in whatever area they're in.
So again, that's offender
aid and restoration.
The OAR. Well, thank you, Nikki, for giving us a little bit of that background. I don't think that a lot of people, everyday people, always understand the mental health impairments of those coming from the system. I mean, being incarcerated can lead a person in average health is the word I'm using, average health, to poor health mentally and physically. I mean, you are in a cell, in a room by yourself, or you're in a cell or a room with some of the most difficult people in your area. Right. And then you are eating food that's not really, giving you a balanced, nourishing diet. Right. It's really a bad thing, but I don't think that everybody or the everyday person always understands the consequences that comes from being incarcerated.
And so if you have someone that is incarcerated and they already have pre-existing mental health issues, to go into those environments, it just intensifies it. Yeah. And so you have some people that don't get the medication that they need, or they get the incorrect medication, or they refuse the medication, and it intensifies a lot of their symptoms. Just as when you're thinking about like paranoia, delusions, and things like that, to be confined in those small spaces, it makes a huge difference on the severity of their symptoms and their ability to function. So when they come home, they need even more services. They need even more support, because the ultimate goal is for them not to reoffend, for them not to go back. Yes. So that's where the focus on rehabilitation, why I feel that the shift has to go in that direction in order for the crime rates to come down, the incarceration, the recidivism. People always talk about recidivism. How likely is someone to reoffend and do those same things? How they come home and what services are available to them when they come home makes a big difference in whether they go home, whether they go back or not.
Yeah, for the audience out there, again, we are mental health professionals, and let me paint a picture for you. You can take a pen, take a pencil, take a marker, and make a wave. You go up, you go down. Just think about the climax, or also think about if someone gives you instructions or directions to get to a certain place. The reality of it is that if you've been there once, it's going to be much easier for you to go there again.
Right.
So if you've broke a crime, if you've committed a crime, or if you've been incarcerated, you already know what to do to get there. So how you come away from that situation is extremely critical, because the chances of you going back there have now already increased. Now, we're talking about community mental health. This is a culture and society-based podcast. Mm-hmm. And in our society today, the majority of people incarcerated are people of color.
Right.
And so when you think about recidivism rates and you think about how we're going to improve the health of our community, mm-hmm. these things are critical for us to put out there in the community before people get to that position right. of being incarcerated.
Exactly.
Again, as I shared with you in the beginning of this podcast, I started this podcast because I wanted to focus on very difficult conversations with very intelligent people. In my career, I have been responsible for having very difficult conversations with some of the most difficult people. But not only dealing with difficult people, but knowing how to also deal with different professionals who work with difficult people. Mm-hmm. My job as a counselor, or as I'm currently an executive director for the past 9 years, leads me to be responsible for working not only with a population of people with mental illness, but also working with police officers, social workers, judges, therapists, school teachers. I mean, it varies. Right. And with all these different roles and professionals who work in the industry of health or mental health, their role's different.
Right.
If you're working with a social worker, and let's say it's a social worker who is old enough to be our grandparent, mm-hmm. They come from a different time.
Right.
And social work and counseling are not the same things.
And when you think about, like you said, some of the older social workers is very much case management focused.
Yeah.
On, what services can I link you to? Let me get you stable and send you on your way. Now, like when you're looking at like a traditional social worker versus like an LCSW, which is a licensed clinical social worker, a lot of them do the therapy and the counseling too. So I think a lot of times they get kind of lumped in together, but yeah, it is a difference.
Yeah, and so for those of you who, if you have a person in your family or someone that that's in need of support, one of our goals in this podcast is to make sure that you understand the difference between case management. So, Nikki, if you can, give them a description of what case management is, and then counseling.
Okay. So for a case manager is pretty much trying to connect you to services, or so if you're a parent of, say, a young adult that's coming out of jail, or that is just, having a hard time getting started in their career, and that they have issues with depression, anxiety, and things like that, and you connect them with a case manager at your community service board, they will focus more on trying to get them the services that they need to help them remain stable. So they will be connecting them to, say, a psychologist that can do a psychological eval to see if they actually do have a mental health diagnosis. If they think that their medication may help them manage their symptoms better, then they will refer them to a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner. They may see that it's a lot of issues that's going on within the family dynamic and say, hey, I know that his behavior is so difficult for you all to manage that you may be thinking about kicking him out of the house. So what if we set you all up for family counseling? So that's kind of what the case manager does. They try to put all the different pieces together to help stabilize the client. And so it's their job to not only try to set that stuff up, but to manage it, to coordinate with the other providers to make sure that that person is following through with those appointments, how they're progressing and things like that. And then typically they meet with the client on a monthly, sometimes bi-monthly basis, just to check in to see how things are going, to make sure that they're managing okay in the community. Because the ultimate goal is to keep the client stable in the community, to avoid hospitalization and to avoid being reincarcerated.
Okay, so that there is a good, strong definition of case management. Give them now a definition of skill building.
Okay, so
or skill builder.
So a skill builder is more focused on education and training. So typically, if a client qualifies for what we call mental health skill building services, they have already been diagnosed with a serious mental health illness. So they would have, say, schizophrenia, bipolar, or schizoaffective disorder, things like that, that have a significant impact on their ability to function on a day-to-day basis. So what the skill builder's job is to do is to find out the things that they need, the areas that they need help with, whether it be with managing their symptoms and behaviors, if it's learning to take their medication, how they, on a consistent basis. Budgeting is huge. Money management is very, very serious, especially when people's symptoms increase. When you think about someone that's bipolar, if they're having that high anxiety, or if they're in a manic phase, they're not thinking about paying their rent or making sure that their gas and electric stays on. The other things, as far as keeping up with their appointments, like I mentioned with the case manager, if they have appointments with their counselors and psychiatrists and things like that, they want to make sure that they keep up with those scheduled appointments. Personal hygiene. It seems like it's very simple to a functioning adult, but for someone who is struggling with mental health symptoms, if you're really, really depressed, the last thing you're thinking about is getting out of bed and washing clothes or brushing your teeth and things like that. So they want to train them on the importance of maintaining appropriate hygiene, laundry, healthy diet, maintaining their physical health. Because a lot of times when your mental health declines, it directly impacts your physical health. So basically, the mental health skill builder looks at each area of this person's life and say, okay, what do they need help with? And they figure out the ways that they can to increase their overall function in those areas.
So it's important that you understand for the audience that skill building services, training services, case management services they're provided best by qualified mental health professionals.
Right.
Counseling services, clinical services are provided best by licensed mental health professionals, and that can be a licensed professional counselor or a licensed clinical social worker.
Or a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Yes. The field of mental health is very much oversaturated, as Nikki spoke to recently, with a lot of people who choose the industry and career because they have a desire to help people. And that's very nice. However, there are a lot of ways you can help a person without entering into their psyche. So I find it interesting sometimes why people are going into the field of mental health. I think it's very important that people consider their strengths and their skills, their mental health, physical health, emotional stability, finances, spirit, and I could keep going on. But these things are very important for a person to self-evaluate in their own life before they decide to get involved in mental health, because when you're getting involved in mental health and we're talking about severe mental health, we're talking about into someone's head.
Right.
There is a lot of ways that you can play your part in society by helping improve people without getting into their psyche. A big reason, Nikki, why I wanted to do this podcast is because I feel like the topic of mental health is very trendy. Mm-hmm. I think that it's a discussion right now that is popular, and it's very popular because we've had a lot of trauma in society that has reached all media outlets. Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of our legislators involved right now. And it's popular. I mean, quite frankly, talking about mental health is creating income for people.
Right.
And a lot of times these are not people who have good mental health or are even mental health professionals.
Very true.
So I'm not trying to discredit the value of the popularity in having conversation about mental health, but I think it's important that we also understand that we have more than just mental health. We have physical health,
right.
nutritional health, spiritual health, and emotional health. And as a mental health professional of nearly 20 years, I do feel somewhat entitled to say that I see so many people getting in the industry that probably shouldn't be, solely based off how bad their mental health and emotional stability is. There are a lot of people who are motivated to try and help people, but they're really trying to work out some kinks within themselves. I've seen many people come out of traumatic marriages and decide that they want to now become counselors because they're really grieving and they need counseling themselves. Many people think they can self-counsel through things, but that's a part of them living in denial.
That's true.
And that's why I wanted to do this discussion. I'm a mental health professional. I'm not going around every day, though, talking about mental health.
Right.
There's a lot of times you'll run in contact with a pastor of a church, but they don't have Christian written on their forehead.
Exactly.
So I think as a society, we need to really focus on being authentic and transparent about who we are.
Right.
Because if you want to help someone, you want to contribute to improving someone's life, you need to first meet them where they are. And a lot of times we're trying to take people where we want them to be. And a lot of times we are not being true to who we are.
Right. Absolutely. I think that I totally agree with what you said. I think that you can be supportive and concerned about people and their well-being without trying to step outside of your skill set or your lane as a concerned citizen, a concerned family member, or what, it's their boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's very important. Or even as a licensed professional, I have friends and family that come to me about issues and things that they're going through. And it's a fine line between me giving them support and giving them opinions or advice versus actual therapy. And so I'm very quick to say, I'm always going to, I'm always here to listen. I can give you advice. I can give you encouragement, but I'm not here to be your therapist. I can recommend you to some great therapists, but because of the importance of our relationship, you have to know what those boundaries are. And
yes.
A lot of times people blur those lines. And I think it does a disservice to the people that we care about the most.
Yes.
Because they see, especially in the minority, I won't even just say black community, I say minority.
Because we're part of the majority.
But especially when you're thinking about mental health issues and concerns, people of color, it's so much of a negative stigma on not just mental health, but counseling in general. We handle our issues in-house. We keep it within the family. We keep it within the community. You're supposed to deal with these things. You're supposed to be, as a black woman, we're supposed to be so strong and we can handle all of this stuff. And part of my platform and when I'm talking to people is saying, showing your strength is seeking help, is seeking assistance, because that helps you remain stable. And when you have children and other family members and people at your job, you have all these people that are counting on you and leaning on you. They're only as strong as you if you're their rock.
Yeah.
So if you don't have somebody that can be your go-to, that can help you tread that water and help you feel like you're on stable ground, then not only will you crumble, everybody else tumbles that depends on you.
Yes.
So I have to be that I always have to play that devil's advocate saying, hey, don't knock it until you try it. There are so many, and I've heard some people say, oh, I went to a therapist and they said this, or I went that one time and I never wanted to go back. And so that's why, kind of like what I was saying before, there's so many different types of therapists. Yes. And just like anything else, if you want to go, if you've saved all of your money to go buy a Porsche, you don't go buy a Porsche at a Toyota dealership. Mm-hmm. They're both great cars, but it's two totally different lanes. So if I'm going through a horrible divorce, I'm not going to go to a play therapist that deals with kids and toys and figurines and sand trays. So I think that it's important for podcasts like this. And then, like you said, when people are making money off of mental health, just make sure that you're informed about the things that you're putting out to the public so that they know, one, yes, it's very important to reduce the stigma, this negative cloud over mental health, because at some point, all of us are impacted by mental health issues.
Yes.
But it's also important to say there are different options, there are different ways, there's so many different types that, like we were talking about before, that is mental health, physical health, spiritual health. Your mental health impacts the whole person, the whole body, so be open to doing body and breath work, doing some yoga, getting acupuncture, and doing some of those different things, meditating. Everybody, if some people, church is super helpful. Other people, they say, I prefer to meditate. And it's all of that is perfectly okay. It's all a part of you being able to stabilize yourself and center yourself so that you can be the best person that you can be.
Yeah. You said a lot of things there. One thing that stands out to me with what you said is attitude. I mean, you have to develop, and it is developing because you may not have it. So you have to find out and learn how to improve your attitude so that you can take better control of your life.
Right.
You can't have, if you're depressed, if you're sad, if you're bitter, and not to say that a person does not have legitimate, valid reasons to have those. But if you still are, you're not ready for change. In order to change and to improve, you have to put yourself in the place to change, to move.
Right.
Something else you said that stood out that I thought about, and it's something that I've wrestled with and I've been frustrated with for a long time. It's, if we're talking about community mental health, and again, this is a culture and society-based podcast, and we're just looking, we're in Richmond, Virginia, so that's the playground in regard to where we participate in a lot of mental health. We work in roles where we do mental health all throughout the state of Virginia.
Right.
But particularly, we've talked about how the Black community and the issues that happen within the mental health there. And what's really sad for me is that, you talked about if you needed a Porsche, if you're going to buy a Porsche, you wouldn't go to a Toyota dealership. Well, a lot of times the recipients of services of mental health, they don't always have the outlets. They don't have the Porsche outlets.
Right.
So a lot of our people who suffer with mental health issues live in poverty-stricken communities. And in poverty-stricken communities, there are jobs that are not the Porsche dealerships of mental health. They may be the Toyota dealerships of mental health. Now, they may have a Porsche office somewhere else, but not always where we live. So a lot of times, because the field is oversaturated with professionals, and the people who are identified as mental health participants is growing and growing. A lot of times the options are limited just due to time and demands. I thought about one time, my wife's an eye doctor, your dad's an eye doctor. I thought about it. If I'm a recipient I'm a Section 8, I'm receiving food stamps, I have limited options and resources, and I need contacts. What if when I went to the eye doctor, because of my income, my socioeconomic status, my mental health, what if they just gave me some Spalding contact lens, like some very generic, poor contact lens, because I don't have the means to afford Gucci contact lens. Now, I listen, for those, I'm just talking like Gucci and contacts. I know it don't make sense, but what I'm saying is that,
I get the point. I get the point you make.
But that's the reality. The services that a lot of our people are receiving are watered down services. I used to tell people all the time, Obama won't change, but we want dollars. You're not going to be able to improve the quality of mental health without increasing money. And, in Virginia, we balanced the budget. So there's been a lot of money put into increasing funding around the state hospitals, but in the community, and we're talking about community mental health, community-based services, there's not been any change that I'm not off the top of my head. As far as increasing dollars,
No, there hasn't been the biggest change as far as funding towards mental health and substance use services would be the arts funding.
Yes.
So they have funneled millions of dollars into the substance use services, which has never been seen before in Virginia. So when you're talking about the politics and things like that, that right now that has been the most recent agenda, and so that's why you see what they call opioid-based treatment centers, like OBOTs and things like that are opening up because now the state is really focused on the opioid epidemic that's happening.
And it makes a lot of money.
It does, and it's been this epidemic is nothing new.
Yeah.
It's nothing new. It's the focus, but it is the focus.
It's the focus. So the media has really helped that.
Right. But what I can say about it is I'm glad that it's here. I'm glad that it's I've heard so many people say, oh, this should have been done 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Of course. But it's been being done now. And so I would say better late than never. For that, because there's so many people that have overdosed or have completely lost the functioning of their life, their family, they've lost everything behind their addiction, where if they could have had those services 10 years ago, it would have made a huge difference. But now what's happening is those people that were using then, now they have kids that are addicted, or they have grandkids that, because it's generational, it's transgenerational. So I think that that is one thing that I have seen that is making a big difference. But again, it's now we're in a position again that we have more clients in these services than we have offices and professionals that can service them. So now you're still seeing the wait list, you're still seeing, but those services are increasing. On the mental health side, I haven't seen any changes as far as increases in funding. I have seen a difference in the insurance companies being willing to let residents and supervisees that are working towards becoming licensed. Now they can provide outpatient therapy, whereas before they weren't paying for the residents.
Well, the demand is called. Yeah, I think the demand is contributed to that.
Right, and so because the need is just not enough licensed professionals to provide the outpatient.
And I'm happy to see them being responsive in that area.
I'm very glad to see that happen, because the other thing is you want the residents and supervisees to have some of that experience. So kind of like what you said before, so that whether they're living in the county or if they're residing in Section 8 housing, they should be able to get quality services. It shouldn't matter where you live or where you come from. It should be enough professionals that can supply that need across the board. So I think that makes a huge difference.
But I will tell you, the only thing that it bothers me about, I'm happy for all the treatment, all the increase in support and services. Mm-hmm. But what I also think is that there's a lot of situations right now that I think people are being falsely accused of opioid issues when that's not the case.
Okay.
And I think, and the reason why I believe that, so let me make sure I'm making myself clear. There are a lot of people who are, let's say when EMT is responding to a crisis, mm-hmm. I just think that right now, because of everything that's went on, I think they are at a very high alert level about opioids. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Narcan is being given in circumstances where it may just not necessarily be the case. And so I think about the negative consequences, but the reason why I feel like that's happening is because there is a story to continue to build. Okay. And don't think that the media don't have a relationship with these hospitals.
Right.
And because they're both thriving financially as a result of that. That's the only thing. I feel like the screening process, the assessment process, and these things happen in crisis, right. So you got to make quick decisions.
Right.
But the media should not show up at a scene at a college party before EMT in responding to an emergency.
No, and a big part of that is social media.
Yes.
So you have some people that are posting, whether it be Facebook Live, Instagram, Snapchat, like stuff travels so fast that unfortunately that does happen sometimes, that your live streaming was happening, and if you have media outlets that are able to get there, it does kind of get blown out of proportion. But I agree, as far as the EMTs, they only have, in situations where you come on the scene and somebody's unconscious, it's kind of like that split second decision, and they're trying to do whatever they can to stabilize that person so that they can make it to the hospital. And now Narcan is it saved a lot of lives. And like you said, sometimes it may be the wrong thing to do, but that's kind of, as far as their scope of practice, that's one of their go-to things, because and that's one thing that I want to clear up since we're talking about this. When you're talking about the opioid epidemic that everyone is focusing on, a lot of times people, are automatically thinking about heroin. But right now, there are just as many, or if not more, people that are receiving different types of opioid treatment, whether it's methadone, Suboxone, naltrexone, any of those things. They're receiving those services because of their addiction to pills. And so it's because of it. The pill trade and the pill industry is just exploding. So that's another thing, whether it be on college campuses in Southwest Virginia, in the country, or if it's in the projects, like that can happen anywhere. It's going across different ages, socioeconomic statuses, everything, different races. People are popping pills left and right.
Well, you went to Radford. I went to Emory Henry College. Exactly. They have trailer parks of meth labs.
Right.
It's ridiculous. And we talked about the fact that most of these people coming out of the system they get released in Richmond, but they're coming from rural areas where they don't have as many outlets for entertainment, so they create their own.
Fun.
And they go into the medicine cabinet, and that starts the beginning of the end for them.
And I've worked with whether it be adolescents, young adults, or on the other end, I've worked with adults with children or young adult children, and they are blaming themselves because the pills that their children got hooked on were their prescriptions. Their old medicine left over from a tooth surgery, or from when they threw their back out, or whatever case may be, and that's how their kid got hooked, because it was all of these old prescriptions, and they never missed them because they weren't keeping track of the pills. And kids are still having these what they call Skittles parties. Oh, let's just take whatever,
Skittles parties.
Yeah, pop a couple pills. So it's happening younger and younger. And so it's just it's so, like I said, it's so widespread. It doesn't matter the age or the race or the socioeconomic status. It's running rampant.
Well, I want to get back over to mental health professionals. And for those of you who are just tuning in, this is the Randy Wilson Podcast. We are sitting here today with Nikki Shaw, licensed professional counselor, certified substance abuse counselor. With mental health professionals, one thing I want to emphasize is that they are ideal. You have a good person working with you when they are able to show patience, good listening skills. They are consistent and available. They can be accommodating, but objective, encouraging, and empowering. However, there are a lot of people who are like this, and they're just not in the industry of mental health.
Right.
And then there's a lot of people in other industries who possess those skills. And because they possess those skills, it helps them even perform better in whatever role that they have, because they're able to counsel, develop, coach, and instruct. But being in the industry of mental health for the past 20 years, I will say that it's not every day that you come across the classic, person who has that. And the reason why is that we all live in a society today that is different than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
Life is tough. Life is stressful. And I don't want anyone out there to look at people with mental health as just people with mental health or clients. Remember, everybody has mental health. Your mental health is critical toward how you take care of your children, what kind of spouse are you, or what kind of son or daughter are you, or what kind of employee are you. So just make sure that you don't look at mental health as, those people, because there's a very thin line between sanity and insanity. A lot of the people that we work with every day used to be social workers, school teachers, attorneys, doctors, and, they just had a bad break.
Yep.
And some of them have not came back from it.
Exactly.
It's important that people also understand that just because you have a severe mental illness, it doesn't mean that you can't be a functional living person.
Absolutely.
You may be working with a person with severe mental illness and don't know it.
Because they're able to manage it.
That's scary though, also, because you could be driving down the street and you never know who you're approaching.
Right.
So I think that first off, I am trying to work and improve myself. Sometimes daily, sometimes I miss a day or two, but I'm trying to, and I believe that we all have an ego, all right, and we all operate instinctually based off how we feel, how we're influenced. You don't have to be a spiritual person, but spirits are within all of us. And I believe that we are the best people when we are operating from the core of who we are. You can't just operate just with your brain. And you can't just operate with your hands. You can't just operate with your feet. You can't just operate with your penis, vagina. I could go on and on. So I feel that in the middle of it all is your spirit and your core. I think it takes a combination of intelligence from the brain, experience from your hands, your feet, your body, and in that middle where our ego is, and I think that's what helps us. So make sure that your core is strong. And it doesn't mean that you have to go to church every Sunday. It's not my job to tell you to go or not to go. It doesn't mean that you have to believe in Christianity. It doesn't mean that you have to believe in Buddhism, whatever. But develop a belief system that works for you. And as long as you're operating well and successful, then you're here on this planet, you're on this earth for a reason until you're not, and you won't know when you're not. So you just got to do everything you can to make the best of it. Gonna change topics a little bit. We're wrapping around to the fourth quarter of the podcast. I could talk forever, but I know that you out there listening as an audience, you only have so much time and attention for what you're willing to listen to. So we appreciate those of you who have stayed engaged through this first 47 minutes of our conversation on community and mental health. I think it's a problem that I see right now in the industry of mental health. Well, let me back up. Before I go there, we are experiencing a change in mental health now with Medicaid. Most of the recipients of services that we provide service to are Medicaid participants, but now there is 5 different Medicaids, if I'm correct. Is it 5 or 6? 6 different Medicaids. We have United Health,
Virginia Premier,
Aetna,
Aetna,
Magellan.
Anthem, Aetna.
Optima.
I was like, there's one more. Yeah.
So you have all these. You have all these mental health. You have all these different types of Medicaid now.
Right. And managed care organizations.
So as providers, what we're experiencing right now that's very challenging. It's very challenging is that a lot of times the participants of service that we work with, they need and benefit from all services.
Right.
Some people need psychosocial rehab because it gives them a structured day, but they also need skill building too because they need support around the home. Right. They also need a psychiatrist.
Right.
they need everything.
Medication management. Right.
But now the MCOs who, quite frankly, I don't think are, this is new a little bit, but it doesn't appear to me that everyone is overly familiar with what all these services are.
And they're not.
So sometimes they're cutting services because they think, well, wait, they already got this. But we're talking about people with severe mental illness have 24 hours in a day. Listen, I don't care how many services that you provide. Life goes on.
Right.
And most of the time when things are happening bad in our life, that's when we need someone there. So they need, at minimum, the resources, the options available. So that's a challenge right now, I think, that we're dealing with services being cut, hours being cut, funding being cut. Yeah. But the needs and the people with mental health is growing.
Absolutely.
By the day.
Yes.
Another problem I see is that in the colleges and universities, there's not a relationship between the insurance provider in the colleges and universities. When we were growing up, you grow up, you go to college, you get a degree, and the reason you go to college to get a degree is because that degree is supposed to position you for your career. Well, now, because the insurance companies are not working closely or working at all with colleges and universities, and if I'm wrong, then please somebody give me some insight, but you're going to have a hard time just giving it to me because there's a lot of people out there who are not familiar with what you're doing, but you may be. But the college is not being prepared for knowing that, hey, in order for this person to graduate and get this job, they're going to need this type of experience.
Right.
That's a major challenge. I mean, everyone knew back in the past 10 years, if you was going to be a qualified mental health professional, that means you have a degree in the human service field, psychology, social work, sociology, or human services, and you would have at minimum 1 year of experience. But if you're going to come out of college and expect a job, then you would needed to have had a job in college that was giving you that experience. And internships count, but you need a full-time internship because part-time internship is not going to equate to a year of experience.
Well, and then the other part that you have to think about is for most programs when you're thinking about whether it be psychology, sociology, any of the human, social work, human services, they're typically not requiring internships for undergrad. They're pretty much you pretty much always have to do an internship. And you do like those practicums or field, what do they call field study and things like that for your master's degree. But because of how much more expensive college is now, and because the way that the setup of student loans, the whole structure of student loans is completely different now than it was when we were in college many moons ago. So it's hard for them to even, if you're not going to school with any type of scholarships, your FAFSA isn't funding all of the student loans. So a lot of times parents are having to do private loans or students are taking out loans and things like that. So they're not going straight into grad school. Yeah. So it's like when you graduate and you get your bachelor's, you want to get that job like you were saying. And then it's like, wait, I worked at Chick-fil-A or I did, or I played basketball. So I didn't have time to have a job because I was an athlete. And what do you mean? I have a 4-year degree and I don't have anything I can do with it. So I think that's where the breakdown of the communication comes. Now, what they have done is that's where the whole QMHP-A, which is adults, QMHP-C, and then the trainee comes into play, that you can register as a QMHP trainee once you have that bachelor's degree, and then you can work to getting your hours at that point. But again, with that, it depends on how your company is set up. If you have a licensed clinical supervisor that has that time in their schedule to devote to someone that needs that amount of training, they have to have that additional weekly training to be able to build up to being a qualified mental health professional for adults and kids or both.
I just want to piggyback on that. You would for those of you who are interested, you would register with the Board of Counseling.
The Board of Health Professionals.
Yes. And and just because you get something in the mail that says you're not licensed.
No.
You just register. Yes.
Right.
And that's new. And so for those of you who want more information about that, Nikki has her consulting services on the side that you're more than welcome to reach out to her. And she's more than welcome to provide support for you. She's also more than welcome to offer licensure supervision for those people out there who are in pursuit of receiving a license. I've been marketing and selling you for a long time.
Yes, you have.
And the thing that makes Nikki so easy to market and sell is that she knows how to adjust within roles. She knows how to be the therapist. She knows how to be the supervisor. She knows how to be the director, but she knows how to be the family person too. Kind of going back to when you were talking about, how sometimes family will come to you for certain things. I don't think people understand sometimes, let's get back to boundaries. In mental health, as a mental health professional, but in life period, it's really important that you know how to set the appropriate boundaries around yourself.
Right.
I've been a school teacher, I've been a mental health professional, and I can tell you now that just because I have those things on my resume, that doesn't make me the best person to counsel or teach my
Right.
son or my family,
Mhm.
because there's an emotional attachment that I have with them before the professional piece.
Exactly.
So I'm not always going to be professional,
Right.
because I love them.
Right.
And sometimes when you love someone,
Mhm.
you want to tell them to kick rocks, or
Exactly.
you know, it's
Mhm.
you're not always going to
Yeah,
be in
they
the best
need
therapeutic
sometimes-
place.
Right. They may need that tough love,
Mhm.
and it may be like I said, it's coming from a place of love and genuine concern. But I would address something that's going on with you completely different than I would a client that's in my chair,
Yeah.
because of those boundaries. You know what I mean? So I could kind of try to get my same point across, but the method of delivery would be different if I'm talking to you about you and your issues than what I would with a client.
Mhm.
And it's a difference. I think that when you're talking about mental health, or like a lot of times, just focusing on say depression and anxiety, because at some point, I mean, everybody's going to feel depressed at some point. Like that's typical. It's part of everyday life. You're going to be more sad than normal, whether it be for a death, a major change, some type of other loss, or feelings of inadequacy, no control. All of those things happen, and you're completely knocked off your square. It's one thing to have a bad day. It's one thing to be what they would call situational depression. You broke up after 5 years and you're depressed because you lost that relationship. It's
normal.
It's totally understandable, and it's situation. You can connect your depression to losing that person in your life. But what about the people that wake up every morning and they are so sad that they can't put their feet on the floor? And when you say, why are you sad? They can't tell you.
Yeah,
they are to the point that they are completely hopeless, and they feel so helpless, and they can't tell you why. That's two different ball games, but they're still very, very important.
Yes.
So you never want to minimize that person that's going through their breakup, or that person that's having a crappy day.
Yes.
Those things are all very important. But when you're talking about those boundaries, yeah, I can sit and listen to you and kind of coach you and encourage you through that crappy day. I can be that listening ear and that supportive friend or family member, because I've been through a bad breakup before too. So yeah, we can go to dinner and have a glass of wine, and we can work through that. And if I feel like at that point, like, oh, you know what, you might need to talk to somebody to kind of get you through it, I'm not that person. I'm the person to take you shopping, do some retail therapy, and go have a glass of wine.
Retail therapy is another great service out there.
Right.
You provide that?
But always. I can do consultations for that. But then for that person that's chronically depressed, if you are someone that I care about and I can see that that's an issue that you're struggling with, absolutely. That's the point that the tough love that I'm going to give you this is a list of the best people that if I were in your situation, this is who I would refer. This is who I would go to.
Yeah, that's what I've done my whole life with you.
Right.
Listen. This is know your scope.
Right.
Know your scope. No, it's look. If you ever have a good friend or a good counselor or a good person, look, you're intelligent and smart when you know the person who knows best. Mm-hmm. And every situation is different. You've just been very good at being the therapist, the family person, the professional. And you've also been really good at knowing when you have to let the person know which one you are going to be right now.
Right.
That's critical.
Mm-hmm.
Tell them more information, Nikki, in regard to how they can learn about you. If someone's out there listening right now and they are trying to become licensed, or they are interested in getting into something related to mental health, how can they best connect with you?
The best way to reach me right now would be on email. It's nikkis80@gmail, nikkis80@gmail. I'm able to provide licensure supervision for LPC as well as CSAC. And then I also do clinical consulting services for whether it be companies that are just trying to start up, get there, and hit the ground running, for different types of community-based services, or if you're a company that's already in business and you need some help, whether it be for how to expand your services or to just make sure that you're on the right track as far as being in compliance with all of our regulations with licensing and DMAS.
Listen, I can't recommend you a better person to connect with if you are trying to develop and grow your business or just develop and grow as a mental health professional. I won't put all our business out there, but she got some things coming. And so you just need to follow her on LinkedIn and get connected.
Yes, and Shaw and Associates is my outpatient therapy practice, and that will be located at 206 East Clay Street, downtown in the city. Wanted to make sure that it was easily accessible to everyone.
Yes.
So it's in a very safe part of downtown.
Yes.
It's 1 block away from the convention center, but it's also on the bus line. I wanted to make sure that it was, like I said, accessible to people coming from work, that people work, for the people that work down there, that come through there for school because it's on BCU's campus as well, and that it's on the bus line because I want to be able to service everybody.
Yes. Thank you again, Nikki, for coming through the podcast.
You're welcome.
We did this. Did you believe that we would do it in an hour?
No, I didn't.
We did. It's an hour.
As much as we talk, that's interesting.
Well, I'm working on trying to be efficient in my life. As we close out, I say this all the time because I used to work with this guy, and we're closing out here. But I worked with him. His name was Dr. Stanton Samenow. Okay. And Dr. Stanton Samenow was the lead psychotherapist, psychologist, and I don't know all the different credentials and titles. He's everything. Right. But in Northern Virginia back in the early 2000s with was it Henry Malvolve? The mass shooting.
Oh, right.
Dr. Samenow was the person who pretty much investigated that case from a therapeutic standpoint. Mm-hmm. And he's the person that I got the CEO of Your Life thing from. I'll never forget that because you got to look at your life in all aspects. You got to realize that on behalf of your life, you are the executive director. You're the chief executive officer on behalf of how you live your life. So if your mental health is going to be stable, first, you have to assume responsibility for yourself. Right. And, think about how companies and hierarchies work. You got to look at the same thing as it pertains to how you run your life as a business. You are a business. Hov said, I'm a businessman. I'm a business. So if you're going to run your life successfully, then having your finances in order is critical. Otherwise, living in debt means living in stress. And we all know from this conversation what stress leads to. So accepted that you are the chief financial officer of your life too. Right. Now you go to St. Holmes, you go to St. Paul's, you're a member of every Methodist, Baptist, Pentecostal Holiness, and Primitive Baptist church, but you are the spiritual leader of your life. Mm-hmm. Dr. Lance Watson is not going to get you to where you want to be. So you need to know how to allow people to minister to you, but you also need to know how to self-guide yourself and self-guide your spirit. So you got to be careful in not allowing things to enter inside that's not healthy for you. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why your ass is in the back. It is because some things you are supposed to leave behind you. That's true. And so just really be mindful of that. Nutrition, exercise, all those things. I mean, if you're really, if you're trying to improve your life, those things are important. Yes. Things that you don't like are just as important, if not more important than things that you do like, because the things that you don't like are going to push you, challenge you, keep you objective, and make you develop and become stronger. So I'll leave you with that. This is the Randy Wilson Podcast. You can follow me on all podcast channels and YouTube. You can also follow me on Instagram at R Wilson Podcasts. You cannot follow me on Facebook, okay? You can if you know me, but I don't accept people on Facebook until we develop the friendship. I'm just not that. I'm struggling right now at being that social. I mean, I got into this to challenge myself socially, to expand myself. I follow you if you follow me, but not on Facebook. Right. Okay, but you can follow the Randy Wilson Podcast on Facebook. Right. That's all about boundaries. Yes. Healthy boundaries. Yeah. Yes, very definitely. Important. But very appreciative to the audience and everyone who listened today. And this podcast is being pre-recorded, so you can expect it to come out in about a week. And coming soon to the podcast, for those of you who are listening at this point, I will be sitting down with a couple people who are running for elected office here in the city of Richmond for city council particularly. So I'm really interested in putting that podcast out because if you're running for politics, you want to make sure that you push your social media agenda. So
and their primary is next week on the 11th.
Yep. So stay tuned. We will be behind the green screen. We'll be downtown. And we look forward to coming to you with more content on the Randy Wilson podcast. Thanks for all those who are listening, and good night.